What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to CLAO's Network for the top 10 decks in the standard format of the Pokemon trading card game. Crown Zenith is not tournament legal yet, but it will be tournament legal the first week of February, which coincides with the Orlando, Florida Regional Championships. So I wanted to make a top 10 decks, including a few of the new Crown Zenith cards, since this is mostly a reprint set with all arts and cool collector's cards, but there are some new cards like Radiant Eternitus and Skyseal Stone, which I believe we'll see included in some decks. Before we get into the top 10 decks, which will include deck lists, shout out to my wonderful sponsors Dragon Shield Sleeves, Beast Coast Pokemon, PokemonCard.io, and PoTownStore.com. Remember to subscribe to the channel for daily Pokemon TCG content as well. So in today's top 10, I will break down for you what I believe the top 10 archetypes are in the metagame going into the Crown Zenith format, which doesn't change too much from Silver Tempest. So I'll be taking into account San Diego regionals, Arlington regionals, Liverpool regionals, and then also looking ahead at preparing for the Orlando regionals in a couple of weeks. So I think these are the three top decks. These are the three top decks that I'm first deciding, do I want to play these or do I want to beat them? And that's going to be Rayquaza Lost Box, Lugia V-Star with Archeops, and Mew VMAX. I think these will be very popular and very successful. I think you need to practice against them if you're looking to do well at the upcoming events with Crown Zenith Legal, even upcoming events without Crown Zenith Legal, because these are all doing well right now. And Crown Zenith isn't going to change that, as the point that I want to get across. So I think these are the three decks at the top. I've kind of made like a little bit of a tier list for myself on my whiteboard to remind myself what decks I want to practice against. And these are the top three. I want to be prepared against all three of these archetypes. The next tier down of decks that I'm expecting to be a little less popular, a little less successful for various reasons, but I still want to have the matchup conceptualizations for these decks in my repertoire, regardless of what deck I am playing or if I'm playing one of these decks. These are going to be Arceus Duraludon, Lost Box with Kyogre, the Vikavolt box with the 1/1 Aerodactyl V-Star, and then also the Regigigas deck. So Arceus Duraludon has been seeing success pretty frequently throughout the Silver Tempest format. I don't think that will necessarily just change because we got a few new cards. I don't think any of these decks are really changing too much. Arceus Duraludon should still be pretty good, but I don't think it's as important to prepare for as those top three, and that's what I'm going to say about all four of these archetypes. Lost Box Kyogre, I actually think is a little bit more technical and a little harder to play at times, and a little harder to map out how you're going to win. Compared to the Rayquaza Lost Box. So I honestly think Rayquaza and Kyogre are both just as good as one another. They both have a lot of interesting techs you can play and different ways you can build them. But Kyogre, I do believe, is a little bit harder and a little bit more technical to grasp. So I think Kyogre will be played a little bit less, and therefore will also be a little less popular and will be a deck that I want to prepare for just a little bit less, because I expect, I'll probably see Rayquaza as opposed to Kyogre if the odds are, averaging in my favor or in the favor of how I think the metagame will play out. Next is Vikavolt V. Gibby won San Diego with Vikavolt, and one of the Kreckler brothers got second at Arlington, I want to say, with Vikavolt as well. Vikavolt's finally doing its job because there's a lot of Comfey decks that don't like getting item locked. It also hits Lugia for weakness. So item lock, hitting one of the best decks for weakness, being able to just toss in a Drapion into your deck to beat Mew. Aerodactyl V-Star as well can just auto win against Lugia. So Vikavolt V, a little bit of a technical deck to play. Nothing compared to the Lost Zone decks, though, in my opinion. Its lack of a larger damage output, I do think will keep some players away from it, because even the games it wins, it feels like you barely won because you're just chipping away at them a little bit at a time. But some people really do like the item lock strategy, and this just won a regional. So I do think this should be somewhat on your radar, but again, not as important as the top three, potentially not even as important as the other three decks accompanying it in this tier. And lastly, in this little block of four archetypes that I've kind of lumped together is the Regigigas deck. Regigigas is just a brute force deck. It's very powerful. It can get through most of its counters with Path to the Peak. Path to the Peak can just be generally helpful against a lot of decks that it comes up against. Very powerful, all basic Pokemon. Fun to play depending on what kind of deck you like. And there's plenty of good lists out there that have been played by good players recently. It's gotten a lot of great placements. So I don't think Regigigas will fall off, but I also don't think it's at the very top right now. And then the final three of our top 10 today are going to be Radiant Eternitus decks, and specifically Radiant Eternitus with Duraludon and Flying Pikachu. Galarian Weezing Eternatus, and Hisuian Goodra V-Star, specifically the Comfey variant, but I have seen some people playing the Arceus variant, and actually played against Arceus Goodra in an online event today when I was prior to recording this video. So Radiant Eternatus is new from Crown Zenith, and it cheats VMAX Pokemon into play. Currently, I think two of the best options to play with this are Duraludon VMAX and Flying Pikachu VMAX. This deck has not really had a chance to prove itself in our standard format yet since Crown Zenith just released. It has been getting some play over in Japan, but I actually believe Japan just rotated to their new E-block and on format, so things are already changing for them over there, and their standard format is not going to line up with ours, and their metagames aren't going to line up with ours exactly for a couple more months until we also rotate and get the new Scarlet and Violet cards. So Radiant Eternatus, it's kind of up in the air right now. I think the deck can be built to be very smooth and consistent, but it can also be easily answered by some things like Path and Cologne to get around to the Duraludon VMAX if you're really relying on that Skyscraper ability. A little differently than it's shut down in the Arceus Duraludon, because then at least you have Arceus as an efficient two-prize attacker, with where in the Radiant Eternatus deck you're focusing on just your VMAXs. Galarian Weezing Eternatus is an annoying deck. It's also pretty cool for some people. You get to play with this Galarian Weezing that can evolve on the first turn, lock abilities, Radiant Hisuian Sneasler, do extra poison damage. You have an 8 Pokemon bench because of Eternatus VMAX, so Galarian Weezing Eternatus, I do think will have some sort of a showing. This is on the bottom of my top 10 decks, so these are like the three variants right now that I'm preparing for. I'm still preparing for them, but not as much as the ones above them. So like Hisuian Goodra V-Star, Israel Sosa did well with it in San Diego. Stefan Ivanov just got second with it at Liverpool Regionals. Galarian Weezing Eternatus has been around for a little while, but hasn't gotten any huge finishes. And then Radiant Eternatus Duraludon Pika is a brand new deck, so it's a little bit lower on the radar right now. So now that we've talked about these 10 decks and why they're in my top 10 today, let's look at the deck lists. This is a deck list I threw together for Rayquaza, sampling some of the online, not online lists, but lists that I found online, like Pablo Mesa, Tablemon's list from San Diego, also Nicholas Moffat's list from San Diego. So I took a couple of those lists, looked at things they were doing that I like, and then I changed a couple things. So I tossed in that Skyseal Stone because I think people will be experimenting with Skyseal Stone. So that's something to look out for if you're playing against one of these kinds of decks. You notice they have a V Pokemon or two in there. They could also have that Skyseal Stone that's going to take an extra prize card against a V-Star or VMAX Pokemon. So that's something to consider for your own decks and also watch out against the opponents. Lugia V-Star Archeops. I based this off of Connor Finton's list, but I took out the Raikou and I tossed in 2 canceling Colognes and a Skyla. Now, Tord Reklev played 1 Skyla, 1 canceling Cologne this past week in Liverpool, but I do think we will see players really wanting to counter Duraludon, especially if the Radiant Eternatus Duraludon list starts popping up in online events leading up to Orlando. So I made this list as kind of like, this is what I think could happen. But at the very least, I think 1 Skylo, 1 canceling Cologne just giving you guys some sample lists to kind of start off with, and things that I am thinking about changing moving into Crown Zenith, and thoughts that I'm sure are on other players' minds as well moving into Crown Zenith. This is Nathan Ginsburg's second place list from San Diego Regionals. Mew, don't think it got any new tricks out of Crown Zenith, and I also see very little reason to make changes to a list that was so recently successful at a large regional championships. So if I'm practicing against Mew, it's probably going to be this or the Liverpool first place regional list, but they're the Mew lists right now, the DTE Mew lists are not varying too much, and I think this is a fine one to either play yourself or practice against to prepare against the Mew matchup. Arceus Duraludon, this is Grant Shen's third place regionals list. Again, uh, Arceus Duraludon is not going to play Radiant Eternatus in it because you don't need that. You have, your normal setup of Arceus Duraludon, and you also have Single Strike Mustard to cheat Duraludon into play. So I really don't think we'll see Radiant Eternatus in these decks, but uh, it's a possibility. The thing is that it's hard to play a single prize Pokemon in these decks because your opponent knocks out the Arceus V-Star, they knock out the Duraludon, and then they knock out your one prizer. That's why these decks don't play a Radiant Gardevoir, because you don't want to give up a single prizer. You want to force your opponent through two Duraludon VMAX. So I don't think this deck will actually change very much. Next is the Kyogre version of Lost Zone Box, and again, this deck list right here, I think it's going to be very hard to justify changing it, since Caleb and Azul and their group have been doing well over and over and over with Kyogre Lost Box. Now, they have been changing it like a couple of cards from tournament to tournament. So some of the changes you could consider are dropping the Zeraora and the Choice Belts for Raikou, and then add in a Sky Seal Stone. And then your Dragonite and Zeraora, your Dragonite and Raikou can potentially take 3 prizes versus a V-Star, or 4 prizes versus a V-Max. Maybe even keep one of the choice belts, so Dragonite still has the potential to hit that 280. That's a change that I think people will be considering for the Kyogre deck. I still think this deck's very, very good. It can be complicated and overwhelming to play sometimes, which I do think keeps some players off of it. But it's a really awesome deck, still very, very strong. Next, we have Gibby's first place Vikavolt list. Maybe players try sliding out the Far Seal Stone for a Sky Seal Stone. Other than that, I think this deck list was pretty right on the head. I think it did well, and it proves itself by it got second place in Arlington and then first place in San Diego. Similar lists. I think this will be the copy paste for Vikavolt moving forward until we see reason for some kind of other change. But like I said, I think Forest Seal could come out for Sky Seal. Maybe you cut another card and you play one Forest, one Sky, see what the situations call for. But yeah, this is the sample for Vika. Next, we have Reggie's. We have Isaiah Bradner's 21st place list from San Diego. I didn't use one of the higher placing lists because I liked Bradner's list. I like the Cape of Toughness because that's going to help against some Lost Zone deck matchups, and also the Path to the Peak. I mean, Cape of Toughness is just going to make it tankier against everything, right? You can have a 200 HP Reggie, or uh, a 180 of any of the other Reggies, or a 170 HP Reggie Alecki, which, that being the lowest at 120, makes it uh, much easier for something like an Amazing Rare Raikou to knock it out. So the Cape of Toughness I thought was really, really cool, but still sticking to all the things that you need, like 4 Path to the Peaks, 4 Professor's Research, a whole bunch of energy, 3 Choice Belts so you have them when you need them. And then we're moving on to the Radiant Eternatus Duraludon Pika deck. I posted a video with a very similar deck list about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this is kind of my sample base list for Radiant Eternatus Duraludon Pikachu. I think this deck runs very smooth and much more consistent than I'm seeing people say online. So maybe try my list. Maybe it's cope. Maybe it's not. But this deck feels fine to me. And it feels really, really strong to slap down 2 Duraludon VMAXs on turn 1, and then on turn 2, Mirage Gate and start swinging. It feels really nice. And we have Galarian Wheezing with Eternitus VMAX. This was played at Arlington by Frank Persick and Jeremy Jallin. Again, I don't think anything really changes here with this deck. The big cards we have are the new single prize Zamazenta, which I omitted from many lists today. Skyseal Stone, which works on basic V Pokemon, so like you could use it on your Drapion in this deck, or maybe on your Crobat V. But I think this deck just wants Forest Seal Stone. And then the other card to consider from the new set is Eternitus, Radiant Eternitus, but obviously that's not going to fit in here. You want Radiant Hisuian Sneasler, and you want all of your dark Pokemon. You want all of your Pokemon to be dark for Eternitus VMAX as well. And then finally, here is Stefan Ivanov's second place list from Liverpool Regionals with Lost Zone Hisuian Gudra V-Star. I think this list is good because of the Roxanne's. Roxanne's really good against Lost Zone decks, and then also Temple of Sinnoh is good against Lugia. It kind of almost reminds me of It reminds me of Tord's way of building, the way Tord built his Sablezard list when he won regionals, when Sablezard was quite new. Um, it looks like Stefan just put in all of the necessities, right? 3/3 Gudra, keeping the line thick, not doing any funny business with Hisuian Heavy Ball or Thornton or any kind of stuff like that. Then you've got a pretty hardy supporter line of 4 Colress, 3 Boss, 2 Roxanne, 1 Raihan. And those 2 Roxanne and 1 Raihan, which are going to show up in your hand a little less often, are going to be easy to find with the Lumineon V that Stefan included in this list. So I really enjoy the Hisuian Gudra V-Star list, and I definitely think people could start playing this deck a little more than they have been. So those are the top 10 decks to either play or look out for playing against coming up in the Crown Zenith standard format. Hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to subscribe to the channel for daily Pokemon TCG content. I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.